The wilds of Alaska are a vast and untamed frontier.
Alaska is beautiful and dangerous all at the same time, and it can turn on you in an instant.
Amid the rugged wilderness, people vanish at an eerily high rate.
People that come to Alaska are either escapists or escapees.
One by one, a madman is preying on the women of Anchorage.
There was rumblings about possibly serial killer preying on the streets of Anchorage. It was like a ghost story.
He enjoys the complete helplessness of his victims. He wanted to hear the terror in her voice.
Police are pulled into a deadly game to try and solve one of the most infamous cases in America. "25 miles northeast of Anchorage, the Knik River Valley is a premier hunting ground. On a brisk September afternoon in 1982, two police officers on their day off are hunting for wild game along the banks of the Winding Gorge.
Alaska is definitely a hunter's paradise. For a hunter from the lower 48, this is really the pinnacle of their hunting career.
As darkness falls, without a kill, the men decide to head home. But while hiking back to their campsite, they make a chilling discovery.
They knew enough not to disturb the scene of that crime and backed away and got the troopers up there.
Alaska state troopers arrive in force. They cordon off the area and begin excavating the scene. The officers unearth the partial remains of a woman buried in a shallow grave. They also find bones scattered across the surrounding area.
If you have some kind of animal or a bear that comes into your crime scene prior to you getting there, they're liable to drag off most, if not all, of your evidence of the crime you're investigating.
There is no ID on the woman. Was she a hiker who lost her way? Or did she unknowingly walk into the path of something more ominous?
A lot can kill you in Alaska. The wildlife can kill you. The climate can kill you. Your own incompetence can kill you. And your fellow man, without a doubt.
Investigators sift through the sand like archaeologists, hoping to discover evidence that might shed some light on the case. Hours later, they find their first clue. The shell casing of a single bullet, a .223 caliber used in high-powered rifles. But this is no hunting accident. To police, it looks like an execution. Handcuffs and ace bandages found among the remains lead investigators to suspect the victim had been bound and blindfolded at the time of death. At autopsy, the coroner determines the woman died of 3 gunshot wounds. Using dental records, she is identified as 24-year-old Sherry Morrow, a dancer at the Wild Cherry Bar on the notoriously seedy side of Anchorage, known as 4th Avenue.
There's assaults, robberies, burglaries, all kinds of stuff. There's drugs, it's a big drug area, probably our biggest high crime area of the town. There's been several homicides since I've been on in the past 3.5 years.
It was just one long series of bars and strip clubs, seedy hotels that you could rent by the hour. There was cars all over the place, stopping, picking girls up.
Sherry was drawn to the wilds of Alaska by the lucrative promise of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline.
It was sort of a perfect storm, and it was just wild and woolly with the construction going on, all kinds of people moving in. We had an awful lot of money flowing around because the oil was flowing.
Lured by easy money, Sherry wound up on 4th Avenue, a part of town where men who work the pipeline like to spend their cash and blow off steam.
There was roughnecks, GIs, prostitutes, pimps, and the smell of money. And they had the triangle trade going, and that was the pimps and the bar owners running the girls from the West Coast to Alaska to Hawaii. So you had this constant turnover of young girls out there on the street. It made it easy to disappear in the crowd.
Police pour through the stacks of missing persons reports of other girls who worked 4th Avenue and disappeared.
It's no big deal when they disappear. The police get a little nervous about it, but unless they have some evidence that a crime was committed, they would tend at that time to assume that the person just left town.
Before the discovery of Sherry Morrow's body, none of the missing persons reports seemed to be linked, nor did they seem to suggest murder. But Morrow's death is enough to force investigators to take another look at the cold case files. 2 years before Morrow's body was found, construction workers digging near Oklutna Road along the Kanik River make a startling discovery.
Oklutna is a pretty remote area. There was one road that went up toward the valley, but you could walk 200 yards off the road and you were in wilderness, real wilderness.
There, the men discover the partial remains of a woman buried in a shallow grave. The scene has been so decimated by animals that police can't find enough evidence to make an ID.
And if it's an old scene, it's been there a while, there's the elements, the changing temperatures, the thawing and freezing, possible predation on a grave. With those things in mind, you're going to lose a lot of evidence. You just have to deal with it. You just have to expand your search and find the evidence that's gone missing. Sometimes that's possible, sometimes that's not.
Looks like an airing.
The victim is dubbed Oklutna Annie by police.
They didn't know who she was. There was no way to tie her to anybody. There was no missing report that matched her. She was unknown.
Desperate for answers, police turn to a forensic artist for help. Using Annie's skull as a guide, the artist shapes a clay mold to reveal Annie's facial features. Police then take photos and distribute the image throughout the area. A crime scene investigator scours the scene for clues and turns up a single piece of evidence identical to that found in the Morrow case.
After they pulled the body out, he took a screen and was panning for bullets, basically, just like you pan for gold. He was sifting through all the sand and mud in the river until he came up with a bullet fragment and an empty cartridge from a .223 rifle.
But no one ever comes forward with any information on the identity of Oklutna Annie.
Nobody cared about her. And that would be typical in the prostitution trade.
But now, with 2 bodies hidden in the wilderness, murdered by a similar hunting rifle, police are faced with a terrible possibility. Someone is hunting women in the wilds of Alaska. When the decaying bodies of women begin appearing in the wilds of Alaska, police fear they are dealing with a brutal killer who has set his sights on the women of Anchorage. The mysterious murder of Sherry Morrow, an exotic dancer, prompts police to take a closer look at who might have wanted the young woman dead.
How long have you worked here? Check back later.
Sherry's co-workers remember she was approached by a stranger that night. a man who offered to pay her $300 to pose for photos. The dancers remember Sherry was brimming with excitement about her first modeling job. But they can't provide police a name or any further information about the mystery man. Sherry left to meet the man the following night as planned and was never seen alive again.
Her roommate reported her missing, and there was an investigation, but there was no evidence that she had done anything. In fact, she might have left town.
But Sherry's co-workers fear the worst.
There were a lot of girls that were disappearing, and the police were very nervous about it, but they didn't have anything to go on. There were no witnesses, nobody would say anything. Most of these women were very much living on the fringe.
Over the past several years, 5 other missing persons cases had been reported. All involved topless dancers or young prostitutes, and each remained unsolved.
I mean, you're chasing ghosts. And in 90% of the cases, the girls were transient. And if somebody got reported missing, it was like, hey, go look for them down in Portland. Or they're over in Honolulu, or they're in Los Angeles dancing. You know, that's where they're at, go look for them. It's not our problem.
As Anchorage police begin to compare notes, they suspect Sherry Morrow and Eklutna Annie's deaths may not be isolated incidents. Officers reopen records on the missing women. They report the disappearances to police departments in the lower 48 and take a closer look at the names of more than 30 suspects, including boyfriends, bartenders, and aggressive Johns.
They were in it for the money, and they were victims from the very beginning. Everybody preyed upon those girls. The pimps, the bar owners, everybody preyed on those girls.
All police have to go on is a single common thread. Each of the victims had last been seen after a late-night shift. Police re-question the missing women's co-workers and gain their first solid lead. Several dancers recall seeing the same strange man. Each describes him as a red-haired man in his 40s who had been frequenting the clubs along 4th Avenue.
It was fertile ground, and it was just a perfect setup for somebody that was a psychopathic killer that could prey on innocent, helpless girls that had no options.
Police increased their efforts to question anyone who came in contact with the missing girls. Surprisingly, all of the men in the girls' lives check out, and none fit the description of the red-haired man. There are also no reported sightings of the women anywhere outside of Alaska. Police fear they're one step behind a cunning and sadistic killer, and they may not catch him before he sets his sights on his next victim. Police also learn of a third body recovered in a gravel pit in the same area where Annie's body was found.
What do you got down there?
We got a sleeping bag down here. Got a bone I think we may be able to ID her.
The victim is identified as Joanne Messina, a cannery worker who was last seen leaving the dock with her dog, and a red-haired man her co-workers couldn't identify. But something about the case doesn't add up. Investigators determined Messina had been shot and killed with a .22, not a .223 hunting rifle. But her body had been badly ravaged by bears and yielded no further clues.
You know, we're not the top of the food chain here. Wildlife can get you, and wildlife will get rid of the evidence.
In addition, 3 other dancers had vanished under similar circumstances. Sue Luna told her roommate she was meeting a man at a cafe who had offered her some money. Her sister reported her missing 4 days later.
I can't believe you want to take my picture.
Tammy Pedersen packed her dance costumes and headed off to meet a photographer who had promised her $300 for a photo session. Her roommate called the police after she failed to return home. And there was Andrea Altieri, who hugged her roommate before she left their apartment, saying she was meeting an older man who promised her a shopping spree at the mall. None were ever seen again, and their bodies were never found.
There was rumblings in the police community about possibly serial killer roaming and preying on the streets of Anchorage. And there was nothing concrete. It was more like a ghost story. They've got bodies and evidence and a dead end. They have nowhere to go. They're stumped.
And if a serial killer is on the prowl, he could be hiding anywhere in the wilds of Alaska. Roy Hazelwood is an expert at reading the criminal mind by examining the evidence they leave behind. The blindfolds found at the scenes tell him a lot about their killer.
He enjoys the complete helplessness of his victims. They're totally under his control. He didn't gag the victim because he wanted to hear the terror in her voice. He wanted to hear her pleading. The killer was a sexual sadist.
A hunter who derived pleasure from his victim's pain and relied on the remote Alaskan wilderness to conceal his deadly act.
Within a very short driving time and even shorter flying time, a killer could take a victim and just carry out whatever fantasies he had with the victim without being concerned about being interrupted or observed. When he disposed of the body, it's in, again, isolated territory, and that makes it very difficult for a homicide investigator.
But the killer left a trail.
The location suggested very strongly that an outdoorsman would have been involved in the crime because he felt comfortable within that type of environment.
Nine months after the discovery of Sherry Morrow's body, a truck driver is on his way to work when, out of nowhere, he's suddenly startled by the sight of a frantic woman in the middle of the road. The driver screeches to a stop. He notices a shadowy figure with a gun duck out of sight as the woman rushes the cab and pleads with him for help.
He was a citizen on his way to work, and he saw her running out into the street with handcuffs on. Obviously not something you see very often at 5 o'clock in the morning on your way to work. And he picked her up.
Visibly shaken and trembling from fear as much as the frigid night air, the young woman tells the trucker a tale almost too bizarre to believe.
And she got in way over her head. And she was one lucky young lady. And she was just an engine start away from losing her life.
A trucker on his way to work stops to help a frightened young woman after she darts into the middle of the road, frantically summoning help. The trucker takes her to a nearby motel where she'll be safe and calls police. Anchorage police race to the motel. There they find a 17-year-old woman still in handcuffs and very much in shock. Police question her, and she recounts the same wild story she told the trucker. She tells the officers she's a topless dancer down on 4th Avenue and claims she'd been propositioned the night before by a red-haired man in his 40s.
Hey, how are you?
She's like 17, beautiful young woman. Got into the trades probably for the same reason everybody else does. It was easy money.
She further confesses that she accepted the stranger's offer.
All right then.
I'm not sure what he wanted to do, whether it was a photographic session or if he wanted to have sex with her, but in any case, they left together.
Once inside the man's car, she claims he pulled a gun on her.
And she said at that point he kidnapped her. He handcuffed her and told her that if she cooperated and did what he wanted her to do, that she wouldn't be hurt.
Her abductor then takes her to a house in the middle-class neighborhood of Muldoon. He holds her hostage in a basement filled with the mounted heads of animals and brutalizes her for hours.
How do you like the decor?
She said he chained her in the basement to a beam, and she was there for quite a while he repeatedly assaulted her.
She tells the police the man then decided to fly her to his cabin in the woods, promising to release her if she cooperates. Once they arrive at the airstrip, the kidnapper shoves her inside a small plane and begins loading supplies. The second he turns his back, she makes her escape.
He chose the wrong victim. And once that handcuff was put on her, it was like, okay, this is bad. And she made the move. She took her moment.
Hoping to corroborate her account, investigators take her to Merrill Field, the airstrip from which she claimed she'd escaped.
We were looking around, there were lots of airplanes there, and she finally pointed out the Super Cub that she said that the guy was trying to put her into.
Authorities run the plane's registration and find it belongs to Robert Hansen, a 40-year-old award-winning hunter and local businessman.
He owned a bakery, well-established business person with friends, and he was a church-going man. An awful lot of people believed in him.
When questioned by police, Hansen is outraged. He says he never met the woman and insists she's making up the story to extort money from him. And he questions the woman's credibility, asking police if it's even possible to rape a prostitute.
He was being taken advantage of by this prostitute who is in the business of taking advantage of people, right? She's transient. He's a member of the community. He's got his business here in town.
And he has an alibi. He tells police that his wife and children were on vacation in Europe, but that he spent the evening with two friends. When questioned, the men substantiate his story.
They swore Hansen was with them playing poker that night.
He was with me. We were hanging out at my house. If we need anything else, we'll be in contact. Thank you.
Hansen even allows police to search his home. Authorities find no evidence to corroborate the woman's allegations.
The things that she said were there weren't there.
I don't see anything.
The trophies, the animal trophies, weren't there. The basement was as she described it, but none of the trophies were there, and there was no scratch marks, I guess, on the beams or nothing. So her story didn't make sense.
The young girl refuses to take a polygraph, and investigators are left to wonder if she may have fabricated the bizarre tale.
It was a he said, she said. There was no sexual assault protocol where every victim went to the sexual assault unit and was examined. There's no DNA. There's no hairs and fibers.
I hate what he did to me.
There was nothing there that you could put your finger on that was really solid proof.
Citing a lack of evidence, the prosecutor drops the case. 3 months later, Alaska state troopers discover the partially decomposed remains of another woman in a shallow grave along the bank of the Knik River. She is identified as another missing dancer who was last seen alive earlier that month. Even more disturbing, Police find a makeshift blindfold buried among the remains. An autopsy reveals something more sinister. Like the other victims, Paula Golding had also been shot by a .223 caliber bullet.
In many cases, the victims were not even known to be missing because they were never reported to the police. In many instances, the victims were never found. So how do you link a case with a victim who's never found? The killer in this case killed in a variety of ways. So where's the ability to link the cases until he started killing consistently with a .223 caliber?
Police are now faced with a terrifying and unthinkable thought. Might these women have been stalked and hunted like animals by a lone madman? And might the woman who got away be the sole survivor? The one who miraculously escaped the clutches of a killer? Alaska state troopers are now completely convinced a serial killer is on the loose. But they have no idea how many victims lay dead in the vast and rugged wilderness.
There's plenty of ways to get rid of people and evidence in this country. Right behind me is the mountains, and over the top of that mountain is 800 miles to the Bering Sea. And there's nothing out there. There's nothing out there. Hard to fathom.
Troopers contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation for assistance. In response, the FBI turns the case over to its Behavioral Science Unit. Agents begin to create a profile of the potential killer. They are able to glean valuable insight into the killer's mind by studying the clues he repeatedly left behind, like the .223 caliber shell casings.
Was it careless on his part? If so, it would not have been a trait that we would expect in an organized serial killer. I think it happened because he had a sense of narcissistic invincibility. And consequently, I think he began to believe that he was, in fact, invincible.
Invincible, perhaps, because he chose the perfect victims, the transient girls of 4th Avenue who he thought no one would miss.
He's a loner, he has no accomplices, he's not talking to anybody. It's a dead-end case. It's one dead-end case right after dead-end case.
Or so it seems. But there is something about the abduction of the woman who escaped that sticks with an Anchorage police officer.
He wouldn't let it drop. He couldn't bring it in himself to let the case go away.
He forwards the closed case file to Alaska state troopers.
It was against policy to remove documents from the Anchorage Police Department to take them anywhere. And he decided that it was worth the gamble. We knew that the troopers had a case, an open case going about those homicides, and he was just 100% convinced that this was something worth pursuing. I mean, that was the first thing that came to mind, is this could be the guy that's been doing these girls.
At the insistence of local authorities, the profilers take a closer look at Robert Hansen. They find he was raised by very strict parents and had a rather difficult childhood.
Do not write with your left hand!
He was naturally left-handed. They forced him to use his right hand.
Write with your right hand! That's what God's will is for you! Do you understand me?
Hansen had very low self-esteem. Anytime he had free time from school, he was expected to be working in his father's bakery.
His will is to write with your
Adding
right
to
hand.
such strain, Hansen was always considered small for his age and had few friends.
He was known as a loner. He also had a very bad case of acne, which resulted in a pockmarked face.
Do you understand?
He stuttered badly. All those things contributed to his being ridiculed by his classmates.
After graduating high school, he enlisted in the Army Reserve and underwent basic training at Fort Dix. He later received advanced training as a military police officer at Fort Knox.
So here's the money.
While enlisted, he was known to frequent prostitutes. But he reportedly found the girls disinterested, the quick romps unsatisfying, and told fellow soldiers that he yearned to take control of the situation.
Bye.
Despite his strict upbringing and disciplined military structure, the profilers learned Hansen had a number of run-ins with the law.
When he came back from the Army, he went back to work in the bakery. There was a younger boy working at the bakery. He convinced him to help burn down the school bus barn. And of course, while this thing is burning, there's Hansen out holding a hose as a volunteer fireman to put the thing out. But his partner got terrified and reported it.
He served time for arson and theft, but appeared to have long since left that life behind. In 1967, he married and moved to Alaska. Now a father of two, Hansen was considered an upstanding member of the community.
Back in the day, in 1983, 84, we didn't know as much about serial killers. So if we came across somebody like Hansen, we might put him aside and continue to look for the serial killer. Why? Because he's a functioning member of society.
But the profilers take note of Hansen's small stature, heavily pockmarked skin, and severe speech impediment. They believe his low self-esteem would likely drive him to live in an isolated area like Alaska. The profilers are also intrigued by Hansen's reputation as a proficient hunter. Everyone in town knew he'd taken out a doll sheep with a crossbow, including Hansen's former neighbor, Larry Bivens, who often hunted with him.
I think he liked the thrill of the hunt, and he liked the sneaking up on him to get as close as he could where he could make that shot, which is what all bow hunters enjoy, because that's the challenge. That's the challenge of bow hunting, is getting close.
Hansen even had 4 animals entered into a renowned world record trophy hunting book.
Bob was always looking for the challenge, a tougher hunt. You know, a tougher animal, a bigger animal, because he always wanted to do better than the last one. You know, and most big trophy hunters are like that.
When questioned by police, Hansen's hunting buddy reveals a disturbing exchange with his neighbor.
I remember one time we started talking about women and things, and I started getting a little coarse and risque with him about it. He seemed to take offense, and he got a little upset with me and stuttered and spit a little bit, and saliva come down the corner of his mouth, and but that was just Bob. You know, sometimes he was okay, sometimes he was just a little bit strange.
Every psychopath has a weak point. Hansen's weak point would have been women. Why? Because number one, he was unsuccessful with them. Number two, they ridiculed him. Number three, they presented something that he was afraid of, literally afraid of, fearful of.
Bivens also tells police Hansen liked to hunt the island sandbars of the Knik River, the very place where most of the victims had been found.
When I told them I had been on those islands with him, and they got real excited. You know, you can get away with whatever you want to do on those islands and nobody's going to know it because there's nobody there.
Perhaps Hansen tired of wild game and turned his attention to more interesting prey, humans.
They would have presented a greater challenge because an animal reacts instinctively to danger, whereas humans have the capacity to employ reason, logic, and intelligence. Humans are very individualistic, and they'll engage in a variety of ways to evade danger. So they present a much greater challenge to the hunter.
If Hansen is the killer, the FBI concludes, he may be hoarding the evidence needed for a conviction. Small souvenirs or trophies from his victims. and they'll need those to put him away. Police begin to fear that maybe the woman who escaped was telling the truth. Investigators believe their killer is a hunter, like Hansen, who knows Alaska's wild country. But without evidence linking him to the murders, they are powerless to stop him.
A sexual sadist is the great white shark among sexual offenders. They're the least common type of serial killer. They're the most proficient, and they're the most successful over a period of time.
Authorities in Anchorage, Alaska are desperate to identify a serial killer before another murder occurs. Robert Hansen, a local baker, is the prime suspect. Hoping to crack the case, police come up with a daring strategy. Authorities threaten to press charges against the two men who claim they'd been playing poker with Hansen the night the dancer was abducted. Both quickly break down.
They said, look, it's not, we were trying to cover for the guy. We thought he was a legitimate guy. We figured, you know, that these women were exploiting him, and we were just trying to help a friend.
At any point in the day.
And that isn't all. Hansen's friends further admit that Hansen had reported a burglary in his home in the early 1980s. A false claim they said netted Hansen $13,000 from the insurance company. Armed with the new information, investigators follow Hansen to work. They ask him to come to the police station for questioning. He willingly agrees, never asking investigators a single question. At the same time, investigators serve a search warrant on Hansen's house. Despite an exhaustive search, they come up empty. Then, just as authorities are about to call it a day, an officer searching the attic rafters stumbles upon something shocking.
He covered hundreds of square feet until he finally hit it. His fingers felt this little hollowed out cache. And he opened it up, and there was a bag of jewelry.
Nestled along Hansen's stash of trophies, investigators make another chilling discovery. They uncover identification cards belonging to the victims and newspaper clippings.
Hansen derived the same amount of pleasure from viewing that jewelry or looking at those driver's license or identification cards as he did from looking at the animals he had mounted in his den. They represented accomplishment in his life.
Authorities also find a map with specific locations marked off.
It's what I call a trophy map, a treasure map, if you will. He didn't take trophies from every single victim, but he did have this map where he could mark his kills, if you will. It also allowed him to refresh his memory as to where he had disposed of the bodies, in case he wanted to go back to see if they'd been found, or to relive the experience by looking at or touching what was remaining of the body.
But the most critical find,
take a look at this,
is a .223 caliber Mini 14 rifle.
Yeah, we need to get this thing processed.
The rifle is sent to the crime lab for further analysis. There, forensic technicians examine the gun and study the strike marks on the shell casings found at the crime scene.
The .223 they took out of there matched perfectly with the round they recovered up in Eklutna.
Robert Hansen is charged with murder, assault, and kidnapping.
All right, listen, Bob.
Despite his pleas of innocence, the evidence mounts against him. In exchange for a full confession, the district attorney agrees to charge Hansen with only 4 murders: Sherry Morrow, Eklutna Annie, Joanne Messina, and Paula Golding. Hansen accepts a plea deal.
And I've read he chose those women because he himself had low self-esteem. I've heard other people say prostitutes are chosen because they symbolize the evil that the killer sees in all women. My personal opinion is that Hansen chose prostitutes for a very simple reason. A prostitute will go anywhere, at any time, any place, for anything. And when they disappear, no one cares.
So nobody can see her.
Hansen ultimately admits he hunted humans, offering profilers one of the first glimpses into the sick and twisted mind of a sexual predator.
He controlled the game from the point of abduction.
What are you doing?
He certainly had the rules. He controlled everything. There was no fear factor on his part. He was definitely the predator. They were the prey.
Hansen admits he picked up a Klutna Annie for sex, then drove her to a remote area where he hunted bears. He killed her after she got scared and tried to make a break for it. Even Hansen couldn't tell police the victim's real name. He further confesses that Joanne Messina met the same fate after the two shared dinner. He claims she propositioned him and that he drove her to a remote area to have sex. When she grew fearful and demanded he take her home, he took her life. And then there was Sherry Morrow, who agreed to meet Hansen under the guise of a modeling gig.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks.
Once in his car, he handcuffed and blindfolded her, then headed to the Knik River. When he tried to remove the cuffs, Sherry began kicking and screaming. Hansen took a rifle out of the trunk and waited for her to cool off. When Sherry charged him, he pointed the gun and pulled the trigger. Profilers believe Hansen became more brazen with each kill, ultimately choosing to take his victims by plane to his remote cabin. There, he would continue his brutal assault.
Some of his victims were with him for many hours. He kept them virtually overnight.
Afterward, he would often strip them naked, blindfold them, and release them into the woods.
Run.
No!
He turned them loose to hunt them down in some sick form of trophy hunting. And that's what the man was. He was a trophy hunter, and he collected things off the girls after he killed them.
Now, he wasn't able to view them every single day like he was his animal heads, so he overcame that obstacle by giving some of the jewelry to his wife and some to his daughter.
According to Hansen, he always allowed his victim a brief head start, then stalked her like a wild animal.
But what has to be understood, and at the core of Hansen's crimes, is sexual sadism. That's a sense of arousal through the suffering of another person. By blindfolding the victims, he created terror in them. By restraining them, he could engage in sexual bondage, their complete and total helplessness. He was aroused by that. He was aroused by their fear. He was aroused by their suffering. And then he was aroused by their terror when he began to hunt them.
Hansen further confessed he equated his human hunts to going after a trophy doll sheep or a grizzly bear.
The killing itself became anticlimactic, as even Hansen said. It was the torture, it was the hunt, it was the stalk that was exciting to Hansen.
Each hunt ended in the same manner. When Robert Hansen hopped his Piper Cub back to the Merrill Field airstrip, he traveled alone.
The victims were never going to win that game against him. I mean, they were innocent, unarmed, unclothed, unfamiliar with where they were. And that was an unsurvivable, unwinnable game.
In the vastness of Alaska, Robert Hansen's killing spree continued for 12 years.
Alaska presents an ideal environment for the type of killer that Robert Hansen was. What he liked to do was hunt.
For those poor women, you know, they didn't have the social network to really survive in Alaska. And, you know, they wanted, perhaps they were escaping something from their lives or, you know, had rough upbringings, but they really had no chance against a guy like this.
There were never any witnesses to the murders. He even admitted shooting Joanne Messina's dog.
He was afraid that the dog would be able to lead searchers to the woman's grave.
In all, Hansen confessed to 17 killings, but it's believed he had many more victims. He eventually identified 15 grave sites, 12 of which were unknown to investigators. Unfortunately, authorities recovered only 7 bodies, likely due to the voracious animal activity in the Alaskan wilderness. Robert Hansen was sentenced to 461 years plus life with no chance of parole. His name has since been removed from the renowned trophy hunting record books.